everyone. Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 Hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Omari, you got a special shout out today. You said you wanted to give some love to another team in Detroit.
Yeah, big shout out to the Detroit Lions, 9-8. I think they just came off of the best season I've ever watched. Honestly, I've been watching this team since, I was in like 6th, 5th grade, probably regularly. And I've never seen a season like this where you could say with total confidence that they accomplished everything they needed to accomplish. And they didn't make the playoffs, I know. But I tweeted this last night, and I'm just going to say it right now. I think a 9-8 season with a win over the Packers that clinched a better record than the Packers and also clinched a winning record and just ends the season on this major high note. To me, I just can't imagine how you could end the season on a better note. 6-win improvement. Just big shout out. Like I just had, like last night I'm sitting down and I'm just thinking, I've never seen the Lions team just from start to finish. You start off 1-6 and then you win, I think 8 of your last 10 or whatever it was. I've just never seen this type of season before. And I think we have to just turn the chapter. If the Lions lost that game, I would have said, okay, this franchise has some things to figure out, but they won. So new chapter for the Lions. Like, I really don't know what even else to say at this point. Never seen a season like it. This is the Pistons Post, so we're going to move on. But I've just as a Lions watcher for a long time, I've never seen this happen before. So I just had to dedicate the first few minutes of the spot to the Lions.
Yeah, so to call myself out, I'm a Chiefs fan, so I'm riding the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes and all that. But I have tried to pay a little more attention to the Lions. And I'll say this, like even the NFL podcasts I listen to are giving the Lions all sorts of love. The Chiefs podcast talks about everybody loves what they're doing. They have all these draft picks. They have all this young talent. What was impressive to me about what they did yesterday, Omari, they did what they had to do yesterday. Like they were this close to making the playoffs. The Seahawks just were able to come through and do what they needed to do. But the Rams almost beat the Seahawks. I didn't watch the game, but I know it went into overtime and all of that. So they were so close to getting into the playoffs. So yeah, big shout out to the Lions. Great season. And it seems like they're like headed definitely in the right direction, the right trajectory. I think we could have a whole segment about the quarterback situation, but we will not because it is the Pistons Pulse. And I do want to give a shout out to Slater917. We got another Apple review and rating, said, love the content. As a Pistons fan from nowhere near Detroit, shout out Pistons fans not living in Detroit. The insight y'all bring each week gives me everything I need to know from an information standpoint and helps me to watch the games with a more critical eye. Keep up the great work. Again, we always appreciate these, and it really does help us grow. The more Apple, 5-star ratings, the more Spotify 5-star ratings, the more reviews, comments, all that stuff, shares, everything you guys can do. We appreciate it so much, and I know, Omari, you feel the same way.
Especially at this point in the season where, I could just see a lot of people are tuning out with no Cade, and the team has been playing really well. So it seems like our listenership has still been steady. And of course, we have some big stuff coming up with the draft and with the trade deadline about a month. Actually, I think exactly a month from today. So keep giving us your feedback. We love it. It gives us motivation, and always just great to hear what you all like from us. So keep it coming.
Yeah, so this is going to be an episode where we're going to revisit our preseason predictions. We did the Pistons Pulse stat prediction hotline. I put out a Twitter poll to see the pulse of the fan base and where they were at with their preseason predictions. But I want to start with what you just mentioned, Omari. This fan base seems to be starting to get over it. Now, I'm interested to see what happens now that the Lions season is over. Because if the Lions were in the playoffs right now, I don't think anybody would be watching a Pistons game this next week. It would be all Lions talk, all of that. But, do you understand the fan base's frustration right now? Because sometimes I go back and forth, like everybody says, oh, there's nothing to watch. And I'm like, I know we'll get into some of these players, but I do think there's still stuff to watch. I do think there's some positive things, and we'll talk about one of those games in a second. But obviously you're feeling the same vibe that the fan base is kind of down right now and kind of over this thing.
Yeah, I get it. On one hand, it's basketball, and you're going to have a contingent of people who are always invested just because it's basketball, or maybe they just get the big picture of the NBA's tough right now. The Pistons probably weren't going to make a deep postseason run realistically, even with Cade. So without Cade, of course, that lowers the ceiling for this team. But at the same time, you have adults who are working. You have a wife or husband, like kids or whatnot, and you're just like, why would I spend my evening watching a bad team that's not going to do anything for the upteenth year in a row? And I get that, but I still think there's been a lot of fun stuff. Of course, it's my job to watch the team, but you probably don't get this job unless you don't mind watching basketball of any form anyway. I think there's still been a lot to, if you're a fan, just to look forward to, whether it's Killian Hayes, who had one of the best games of his career again last night. Isaiah Stewart, like Jalen Duren didn't play, but he's been great. So we're going to revisit some of our preseason predictions, some of which I think were pretty good, some of which were terrible. But I still think there's stuff to watch. Like if you're a casual fan and there's an okay, like I get it, but overall, I still think this team has been overall pretty interesting. Maybe not as from the standpoint of the winning, but just from the game-to-game development. I think there's still been a lot of that if you're into that type of thing.
Yeah, there's been a lot of individual player development, which we'll talk about, as you mentioned. But it's such a roller coaster ride that it makes it interesting to me. I never know what we're going to get on a given night. And nothing highlighted that more than this past week, Omari. They go to Golden State and pull out a win with one of the best home teams in the league. And I realize Steph Curry's out. I don't care because the Pistons are playing every game without Cade Cunningham, and the injuries continue to pile up. Marvin Bagley, Duren didn't play on Sunday night, but they go to Golden State. They play well. Looks like they're going to give the game away. They give up the three to Klay Thompson, who ties it. Sadiq gets completely lost, guarding Klay, gets ball watching. I tweeted something out. I actually called out Isaiah Stewart a little bit because Stu is guarding Kevon Looney, who set the screen, and he got ball watchy and didn't help and was caught inside the three-point line in that situation. But then they come down, and Sadiq saves the night with a big three. So, those few possessions were a roller coaster alone, but let's start with that Warriors win. That had to be great for the morale of the team.
Yeah, it really was. You're coming off of a pretty bad loss to the Portland Trail Blazers. And like you said, no Steph Curry. They didn't have Andrew Wiggins either. And they still have Klay Thompson. They still have Jordan Poole. They still have dangerous players. But
Draymond, who got ejected in that game. I had forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he did get ejected toward the end after getting into it with Isaiah Stewart. So still, if you just look at it overall, just best players on both teams' standpoint, you still see that Golden State still has an edge. And for the Pistons, just to execute down the stretch, like Killian, he didn't shoot well, but 13 assists, 0 turnovers. I think he had the highest plus minus of the team. Not the single game plus minus is the best stat, but I think it's still pretty useful in situations like that where the eye test also supports it. And it's just some of the shots that they hit down the stretch.
Yes.
Like you get big threes from Bogey and Burks. And as soon as Klay Thompson began knocking down those threes after starting off 0 for 6, you're kind of like, okay, if Klay gets going, maybe that swings the game because we all know what he can do. And it almost did. He tied the game at the end, and that's a game that they very well could have lost just based on how the season has gone, and they didn't. So, of course, they lost to the Spurs, and then they lost to – who did they play last night?
The Sixers.
The Sixers. Like, all these games got to run together after a while.
They really do. It's crazy. Sometimes I feel bad, Omari, because I'm like, man, I don't even remember who they played the other night. And I watch every single game. I've watched 100% of Detroit Pistons basketball this year. I've watched every single second, whether live or I get up and watch the next morning or, whatever it is. But sometimes I'm like, dang, I can't remember so I don't know if I'm getting old or there's just a lot going on, but that made me feel better that you forgot who they played last night.
And I was actually at all these games in person, which makes it worse. But a lot of these losses end up sort of going down the same way.
Yes.
So when I try to think back on games, it's usually specific moments or, maybe I remember being in a specific arena. But a game like that that Sixers loss, where it's just, similar loss they've had all season, just, everything about Brett Allen. And I'm sitting in the same seat at the LCA as I always sit in, and all those games kind of run together after a while, honestly. So, I mean, you'd be surprised. I forget games a lot, and I'm like, who did they just play 12 hours ago? Like, I was just there. But long story short, I think anytime you get a win and you actually close out, for this team, it's always a big deal, and that's what they did, and they haven't had that since. So, even if you don't have Steph and you don't have Wiggins or whoever, I still think that that's a win that this team can build on and take pride in.
Okay, so before we get to a couple players, Omari, I have to ask you about the defense. The Pistons essentially have the worst or one of the worst defenses in the league. We've talked about it. We've talked about how they don't have a lot of good individual defenders. The scheme has changed since last season. And I just want to point out, the scheme they're running this year is more complicated, in my opinion, than whenever you just switch everything. Part of the reason you switch everything is your communication and everybody off ball, your rotations, all that stuff. It's still a complicated scheme, but it's not as complicated as what they're doing now, where it's drop, ice, weak side tag man, weak side rotations, no help off strong side corner, more and more, intricacies even than that. But what is your vibe just from the team, from the players, Coach Casey, Coach Allen? Because to me, there hasn't been any improvement, Omari. That's been my frustration or what I've been kind of keeping an eye on is it seems like it's just as bad as it was at the beginning of the season. Maybe it's because of the injuries. I know they have young players, but I would have liked to at least see a little bit of improvement from this defense over the last, month or so.
No, the team hasn't improved defensively at all. And at this point, I wonder if they will, period, throughout the course of this entire season, just because it hasn't been there. And we talked about it going into the year, right? That if you just go up and down the roster, how many proven plus defenders does the team have? I mean, we both agreed on Killian Hayes and Isaiah Stewart. And then it's like, well, maybe K could get there, and K's out, obviously. Then Isaiah Livers, we talked about the same defense, but he's been hurt. He also hasn't played. And then everybody else on the team, it's like, okay, well, Jalen Duren is 18, 19 years old. He's probably not going to be a plus in that end. And he's physically imposing and has the instincts, I think, to be a rim protector, but actually applying that into the game is a different thing. And that's fine. You don't expect your 13th overall pick to come in and immediately be the rim protector you expect him to be 4 years from now. But just beyond that, I mean, the veterans, Bogey, Alec Burks, didn't really have reputations as defensively, positive guys coming in, and they haven't been, quite simply. You haven't really seen the gains from, Sadiq Bey and Marvin Bagley and maybe some of the young guys who have potential on that end. So to me, it's still more of a roster issue than a coaching issue. And yes, there are schemes that can cover up a lot of those problems, but I think when you're a bad team filled with bad defenders, you're probably just going to play bad defense, and there's not a lot you can really do about that. So I just don't see how this team really makes any significant improvement with, around 38 game stuff at this point.
I think this is who we are going to see them be for the rest of the season. And it's one thing not to have point of attack defenders, Omari, which is something that Killian can do, like just guard the person that's in front of you. What I think I didn't anticipate is how many guys this roster has that aren't like good team defenders. Like that's what Isaiah Livers is, Omari. I don't know that Livers is like holding up at the point of attack against a lot of the best players in the league, but Livers was really good, just like a connector piece defensively. He'd make the rotation. He'd tag the roll guy. He would, communicate. They're missing that. And you don't expect young guys like Ivy and Duren to do that. But then even some of the veterans, like I'm not sure that's something that Boyan's great at. I don't watch Burks closely enough on the defensive end anyway to know how he is there. But that seems to be where they really struggle, is they just don't have all these fill guys, these rotation team defenders. Sadiq Bey isn't even good at that, let alone at the point of attack. So it will be really interesting. I think it's a much larger conversation that comes into play when we get to the offseason, is some of the moves that Troy Weaver makes, does it really attack that? Because where's he going to put his focus? Where's he going to put his focus? Because, yeah, they're middle of the pack, back in the middle of the pack in scoring, so you still got to get better there. But to me, there probably is going to be an emphasis on the defensive end and acquiring players that are going to help you out there.
I would think so. And then you also just really want to see that internal improvement as well.
True.
I think, as far as last season, you look at how, which players in the NBA that fit this core and does not disrupt what you have in place too much, can really transform this team defensively. And it's, for the most part, big men, right? Like you look at, centers, like maybe find a backup center who's that type of player. But I think Duren and Isaiah Stewart ideally are giving you 48 minutes of above average defense every night. And you're not quite there yet, but I think internally, that's what you hope for next season. And beyond that, they really do just need some improvement on the wing. They don't really have any, deterrence on the wing at all. And you just can't do much when your best defenders are one big man who's 6'8" and can do a lot of things, but he can't do it all himself. And then Killian Hayes, who you can put him on the opposing guard and feel pretty good about it. But you just have this entire range of players right in the middle who are just dominating the Pistons right now. And that's probably what you need. You just need a really good two-way wing who can plug into the starting lineup and who can, at the very least, hold his own defensively, if not just be an overall plus on that end. So that is a priority for the team, no doubt. I think if there's one takeaway from the season, it's that you just need to be able to put out at least 3 or 4 good defenders if you want to have a chance at winning, or else every night's going to be a shootout. And if you're not a top 5 team, you're probably going to not make the leap you want to make.
For Pistons fans, Amin and Asar Thompson are 2 guys that will really excite you if you really agree with that and need some defensive wing and athleticism. But let's get into these projections that we had preseason. We're actually going to start with 2 guys that were midseason trade additions from Troy Weaver over the past couple seasons. And then in the segment 2, we'll get into the 2020 and 21 draft classes. Let's start with Hamidou Diallo, Omari. So we projected, and the projections were an average of what Omari and I had. So it's the average. We projected 7 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist. Hami is currently averaging 7 points, 3.1 rebounds, and just under 1 assist per game. So this was one where we were pretty close, Omari.
Yeah, the thing about Hami was just how many minutes is he going to get?
Yeah.
And, and so far I think his role's probably been exactly where we expected it would be. If Isaiah Livers or Kevin Knox are shooting the ball or during the rotation, maybe they get preference. And just him being a small ball forward, maybe those opportunities won't be there every night. But injuries have thrust him back to the rotation. And I think he's actually been a pretty ideal version of Hami, just from the standpoint if he could come in and immediately give you energy, which this team has often lacked, as we know just from watching the games. I'm pretty happy that the points per game are like dead on and the rebounds are maybe a tad under, but that was a pretty accurate one. And I also think we nailed what his role would be through this point, and that injuries would kind of have to pave a way for him, which they have. And he's been, I think, exactly the ideal. I mean, maybe defensively you still have some nitpicks or whatnot, but I think he has the season that's going pretty much as expected thus far through 44 games.
Well, he's had a really good stretch as of late. He's brought that energy in, made some plays, and, done what Hami does. And I said yesterday watching the game that I feel like Hami's a perfect 11th or 12th man on a team. And I know some people aren't going to like that. They're like, no, Hami's a rotation guy. And I get it that some people are higher. I used to be higher on Hami. Now we've had a larger sample size and more data to collect and watch. And I just feel like he's one of those guys that's perfect for that role. When somebody gets injured, he can come play 10, 12 minutes a night. You're in the dog days of January and guys aren't playing hard on a given night. He comes in and just gives you a boost of energy. And I just think that's what he is on a good team. And so maybe he does stay around it and find that role with the Pistons moving forward. I just don't know that I'm super interested in seeing Hami be the 8th man on the Detroit Pistons over the next 2 or 3 seasons. So, essentially, like you said, he's been what we thought. The Twitter poll, he was 8% had him above expectations, 68% right on par with expectations, and actually 24% of the poll had Hami below expectations, which to me is a little bit surprising. So the part of the fan base, which is just Twitter, and I know Vince Ellis reminded me of this, that's not indicative of the entire fan base, but that we got to answer the Twitter poll. 1/4 of them a little bit disappointed with Hami. That does surprise me just a little bit.
And then I think that 24% of the fan base is kind of what we get out with Hami, where I think there is just a contingent of Pistons fan who sees a lot more potential in him, probably largely because of the athleticism.
Yeah.
Which is fair. But the bottom line for Hami is that he's not a strong shooter. And he also doesn't really create much with the ball in his hands, which puts him into more of an off-ball, just sort of energy specialist role where he could push the ball in transition or make things happen on cuts and putbacks. He could put him in the dunker spot. And he's a unique player. And I think he does a lot of things that this team needs just from a not needing the ball, can come in to make energy plays standpoint. We see him make those plays consistently, and the effort's always there. Like, he's not always as good defensively as you want. He's not going to give you a lot of shooting, but he always plays with a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And like you said, for an 11th or 12th man, I think that makes him an ideal player for that type of role, because there's just some games where he needs somebody to come in and just give you a pop of energy, and that's what he does. So it's still interesting that there's a bit of a disconnect there, because I think that this has just essentially been a quintessential Hami season, and he's just doing the exact Hami things you expect Hami to do. But 24 is still a pretty decent chunk who expected more. So to me, that's curious because I just think that this season's been like dead on from what you could realistically expect from him.
No, I agree with you. And obviously, our projection and the actual me, and so that makes sense. And I do, he's another example of a defender who, so he has some good point of attack stuff and he has some good disruption stuff, but like making the rotations, then he gets backdoored, some of those things. He's another one of those defenders that doesn't do those things well. The next one, Omari, may be the one we missed the most, and that's Marvin Bagley III. We projected 16 points per game, 8 rebounds per game, and 1 block per game for Marvin Bagley III. His actual stat line right now is 10.6 points per game, 5.9 rebounds, and 0.7 blocks. So I know he's been injured. We're not going to see Bagley for another 4 to 6 weeks until he gets reevaluated. We may have, I don't want to say we've seen the last of Marvin Bagley III this season, but there's not going to be a ton of season left whenever he starts to play. Where do you think we went wrong with the Marvin Bagley III projection?
So the difficult thing with Marvin, and I think he'll probably come back sometime after the All-Star break, his reevaluation date. If he's reevaluated right at that 6-week point, it'll be during All-Star weekend. So if he comes back last week of February or first week of March, just depending on his recovery. I think the tough thing with Marvin was that a lot of that kind of came down to Jalen Duren's readiness, which over the summer, we could not really predict that Jalen was going to have the role that he's had. And I don't think the coaching staff do that for a fact up until you actually get Jalen into the system and you're watching him in practice every day and seeing what he does with his minutes. And then it's like, oh, like he could actually handle a lot. So we're not going to hold him back. We're just going to just let him go, basically. And we're going to talk about Jalen Duren later. But I think Jalen Duren's emergence just lowered the minutes available for Marvin, where we actually saw him start at the beginning of the season, and then they swapped him and Jalen Duren to prioritize that Isaiah Stewart Duren front court, which I think we saw as a possibility, but that was like the best case scenario for Jalen Duren, right? And he got there. And I think for us, it was just if Marvin's starting, he's going to get points because that's what he does, and he's going to rebound because that's what he does. And he's still done that well off the bench. He just hasn't had the minutes or the health with that MCL sprain to really get into the groove he needed to get in. So just a lot of stuff that you can't really predict, whether it's the injuries with Marvin or Jalen Duren being ready. But that's led to Marvin Bagley just not quite having the role needed to put those points up.
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at just his 18 games last year with Detroit and the 25 this year, Omari, he's playing 6 minutes less per game in the 2022-2023 season and getting 3 less shot attempts per game. So I think our projection was accurate in terms of the role we thought he was going to play. And as you've pointed out, that's just not the role he's ended up getting. And, the Twitter poll, 2% had above, 45% right at, and then 53% below. I'm actually surprised that the percentage of below expectations wasn't higher. He got the contract, which was surprising to a lot of people nationally, even some people within the Pistons fan base. And so I'm actually surprised. Maybe people are giving him the benefit of the doubt with the injuries. I have been a little disappointed. I'll have to admit that I was hoping for a big year from Marvin Bagley III. I think he's made some small strides defensively, actually, just in terms of his activity overall, even though the block shots are actually down. I think there have been some small strides. Like, don't get carried away. I'm not saying he's a plus defender now, but I did think he was just at least going to be a bucket, catching lobs, those type of things. And that connection and chemistry just didn't seem to be there even in the games he did play.
It didn't. And just a lot of that is some missing training camp and preseason with No, he didn't miss training camp. He missed preseason and then the start of the regular season with that MCL sprain. And that's one thing with Marvin is that he's always been injury prone, and that's been the case this season, but also just extremely unlucky because both injuries were just complete fluke accidents, right? It's not like he landed on his ankle wrong or had a non-contact. Like he landed on a player's foot getting back on defense during preseason against Memphis. And then his hand just kind of got caught on like a defender's waist or something. And that Spurs, and that last game he played, and just looked like his fingers just got bent. So just a little bit of a weird situation. That was in the Portland game last week. Just an odd situation, an odd way to get injured, and it's cost him time. But again, like the thing with Marvin is that he has been injury prone throughout his career. And I think when you take that into account, the season's actually been a more usual season for him, honestly. And I think when he gets back, I'd be curious to see what kind of role he's able to get and how he's able to play.
Absolutely. So we're going to go to a short break right here. And then when we come back, we're going to dive into the 2020 and 2021 draft classes, starting with a very impressive season from Killian Hayes.
All right. Hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Menares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some Free Press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
All right, we're back with segment 2. And we're going to lead off with Killian Hayes, who I think has probably been, if we're talking of just like a raw improvement standpoint, the most impressive player for the team this season. Had a career night, tied his career high with 26 last night. We projected 8.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 5 assists, at 2.5 3-point attempts per game. And his actual numbers are 9.1 points, 2.9 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and then 3.4 3-point attempts per game. So points, rebounds, assists are all actually pretty close. They're all within like 0.5 or 0.6. But the 3-pointers is actually better than we projected. He's taking almost 1 more 3 a game than we both thought he would. So we both said that going up, but just not quite as high as it went. And for the poll, 73% put them over, and then 22% put them at expectations, leaving just 5% who have been underwhelmed by him. And, you know, maybe there's a very small contingent of the fan base who thought he'd become James Harden this season, but still very clearly 95% in favor, which I think sounds about right.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised the above expectations wasn't more, but there are a lot of really big Killian fans, and a lot of them probably were just like, no, we knew this is what Killian was going to be, and they did like realistically expect him. I don't know if anybody could have expected this, Omari. Like, he's gone even beyond what I feel like was rationally possible for his improvement this season. And it didn't even start off good. Like, that's what's even more impressive is these numbers would be better if we took out the first 10 games or so. He started the season not great, and then it's been really good. His last 2 games, 18 points, 26 points. Both games he was over 50% from the field. 6 of 13 overall from 3. The 3-point percentage, not only have the attempts gone up, but the percentage has gone up as well. Like, to me, that's what's impressive is whenever you can increase the volume and you can increase the percentage at the same time. So what he's showing is really awesome. I'm so happy for Killian. We talked about it on the last episode. Like, he just needs to stay in the same, whatever headspace he's in, stay in it. He hit a baseline jumper over Matisse Thybulle on Sunday night and started talking trash when the Pistons were down 20. And while I don't subscribe to players doing that when you're down 20, I don't even care because I want Killian to be feeling himself at all times, no matter what. So he keeps these vibes going. And, I think the question with Killian now is this truly who he is? I think we've seen enough sample to believe so. The question is now, if he does this for another almost 40 games to close out the season, what's his role on this team next year? With Cade, with Ivy, if you added Scoot Henderson, even if you don't add Scoot Henderson, is he making a statement to be considered as a starting player on this team again? And I think it's hard to say that you don't at least have that conversation if he continues to play this way.
I agree. I mean, I think you could argue that, just from an overall impact standpoint, he's been Detroit's best guard. And Alec Burks has scored the ball so well that I think he's probably a consideration for that argument. But just Killian definitely plays with on defense. He is by a very wide margin, just the best passer and best, I think, overall playmaker on this roster. He's knocking down threes with consistency. That mid-range jumper has been automatic. And he's playing with confidence. We saw in the last 2 games that when he's feeling it, he can really, be aggressive and hunting his own shot. And he's just playing with the confidence and the freedom that we have not seen from him. So even though we were pretty close in our projection for the stat line, I think the underlying play behind those numbers is better than either of us expected. And he had that horrific start to the year, so that drags his numbers down overall. But by the end of the year, his points and his assists should continue to trend up. And I think our projection, if we revisit these numbers at the end of the year, will look more inaccurate than it looks right now.
I will freely admit he's been way above expectations for me. I assume he'll be the guy he is the guy that I would say has been higher above expectations than anybody else. I'm glad you pointed that out. Even though our stat line projection looks somewhat reasonable right now, it's probably not going to at the end of the season. And just in general, if you just spoke about it, I would say he's been better than what we thought. Let's move to another guy. I said that Marvin Bagley may have been the guy we missed the most. This next guy is in consideration as well. Saddiq Bey. We projected 17 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. His actual numbers are 13.8 points, 4.2 rebounds, and 1.5 assists. We projected a slight increase from Saddiq Bey, and we've actually gotten a decrease. Where did we miss? What did we miss with Saddiq Bey?
So here's the thing about Saddiq is that I think we assumed he would pick up where he left off, and that just didn't happen. He started off last year in a slump, but by the end of December, I think he had really shook most of that slump off. And then when you look at his numbers from that point on until close to the end of the year, they started shutting players down. So his efficiency kind of took a hit over the last few weeks of the season. But he basically was that guy for a significant stretch last year. He basically was a 17 points per game scorer with pretty good rebounding and pretty good passing. And we basically just assumed that he would pick up and that would continue to be his trajectory over the course of this season. And that hasn't been the case for a variety of reasons. I think one, his outside shooting has slumped pretty significantly, and he's currently in the midst of his worst shooting season. And his playmaking is not where it was last season. I think he's regressed a little bit in that area. And he can still score the ball. He's improved as an interior scorer. His footwork is better. There's still been improvement. But the bottom line for him, and we've talked about it, is that if he's not shooting the ball well, that has knock-on effects for the rest of his game. And at the end of the day, the three-point shooting has to be his bread and butter, and it just hasn't been. I also am curious. I believe we did our predictions before the Bogey trade, right?
So I was going to say that even about Marvin Bagley III, but yeah, it's especially comes into play now because we were having to give points somewhere, right? The team was going to score points. It's not like they're going to score under 100 points, but we weren't counting on Bogey getting 20 a night. And so I think some of our points per games were probably higher than what they are because we didn't know that he was going to be getting those.
Right. And I think if we knew that Bogey was going to be on the roster, maybe we don't project 17 for Saddiq just because Bogey's going to eat into that. And we certainly don't project what we projected for Marvin Bagley III because we probably have a real debate on does Marvin even start at that point, right? It doesn't make sense to start him when you can start Saddiq and Boyan or just go a different direction with that. So, our projections are a little outdated just because that was a pretty significant piece of the puzzle that had not come into play yet. But the bottom line for Saddiq is that he just isn't shooting the ball well, and he's not going to sniff anything close to 17 points per game in this league if he can't get those outside shots to fall again.
Yeah, I mean, both of the ones we missed the biggest, it came down to roll. I gave the Marvin Bagley III in terms of minutes and shot attempts. Bay's only playing 5 less minutes a game. I mean, I guess that's still significant, but he's getting 3 less shot attempts compared to last season, Omari. And he's taking less threes, 2 less threes a game. This is the biggest concern for me with Saddiq Bey is 2 less threes a game, and his percentage is also going down. So where Killian Hayes' volume went up and percentage went up, Saddiq Bey's volume went down and the percentage went down. He's getting to the free throw line only a tad bit more. And so, just across he's got to figure out, we talked about this last week. We don't have to get into it again, but he's just got to figure out his role on both ends of the floor. And the Twitter poll backed this up. Only 1% said above expectations, 17% said at expectations. 82% of the fan base feel like Saddiq Bey's been below expectations this year. And at the end of the day, like, as much as I love Saddiq, I can't disagree with him.
And I think that Sadiq's probably the player that, if you just look at the poll, the fan base has been the most disappointed with, for obvious reasons. I think he was a player that many expected would take some sort of leap this season, and it just hasn't happened. So I'm curious to see if he does get over this slump and he's able to sort of course correct that narrative by the end of the year. But he just got to start knocking shots down, and that's the bottom line for him.
He had more below expectation votes than the one for Dwayne Casey / the team. So that tells you how disappointed the fan base is in him, because we know the fan base hasn't been happy with Coach Casey and the results from the team. And we will discuss that a little bit at the very end of the episode. So that tells you how the fan base feels with Saddiq's season. And, for him, I hope he figures it out. A guy that has figured it out and exceeded above expectations, Isaiah Stewart. This is another one we ended up low on just in terms of points, actually. We had him at 8.5 points, 9 rebounds, 1 block. He's at 11.6 points, 7.8 rebounds, 0.7 blocks, and 1.1 assists. He's also shooting 4 threes a game, which I don't know that we wrote that down in the outline. I believe we did talk about it on the episode. So if someone wants to go back and listen, it's a great episode, and you could tell us what where we discussed his attempts. But I would say that's probably above what either of us were expecting in terms of 3-point attempts as well.
Yeah, I would say so. I think we were in the range of like maybe 100 or 150 3-pointers over the course of the year. Made 3-pointers, which, probably would have put him at about 3 attempts a game. And he is a little bit higher than that. So, yeah, overall, we were probably a little more skeptical about his growth as a shooter this season, and he has grown a lot. Yeah, I think other than Killian's probably number one, but I would say Isaiah Stewart is probably not too far behind as far as just how much he has exceeded expectations across the board this season. Anytime a big man steps into a new offensive role where you're not maneuvering around the rim as much, you don't really know what to expect. Some guys figure it out quick. Some guys it's an extended process. Dwayne Casey talks about Jonas Valanciunas a lot, and he didn't really truly embrace the 3-ball until he got to New Orleans a couple of years ago. And he was drafted in 2011, right? So you're talking about 8-9 years for Valanciunas to really embrace the 3-point shot, which I still don't think he's embraced as much as Isaiah Stewart has. So just speaks a lot to the work Isaiah Stewart's put in. And, I think just the vision that the franchise had for him overall, for him to shift roles, entering his 3rd season. We don't see that type of growth curve very often for big men. But, I would say just looking at the poll, you got 72% exceeding expectations and then 25% at expectations, which is right there with Killian. Pretty clear that he's in the midst of a really great breakout year.
We don't have to talk about Stu a ton because we've done whole segments talking about his transition to playing on the perimeter. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it more as he continues to get better and better. I just want to, again, mention the 3-point attempts. He averaged just over a half attempt a game last season, just under 1 in his rookie season. Most of those came at the end of the year. He's over 4 per game. That's insane progression for a player, and shooting it at 34%. So that's where the 34% becomes really impressive, Omari. Maybe just in a vacuum, like if you just look at 34%, you're like, oh, that's not that great. He's increased his attempts by almost 4 per game. That's huge. Like there's a whole mindset behind that, and being able to shoot through slumps and misses, makes, end of games, all of that. And I just want to touch on his rebounds real quick. The reason those are down is, again, because of the role he's in. Him playing next to Jalen Duren, nobody's going to get 10 rebounds a game playing next to Jalen Duren because he's gobbling up so many. So his rebounds are really good for the new role that he's playing. He's not going to be a consistent double-digit rebounder. I think he started at the 5 on Sunday night, and he did. I think he had a 20 and 13, I believe, on Sunday night versus the Sixers because Duren was out and he played at the 5. So don't look at those rebound stats for everybody listening and think that he all of a sudden got worse as a rebounder or isn't focused as much there. There's just not as many opportunities in that role. And we're going to close this one. I know Isaiah Livers is in this draft class as well. He's been injured for most of the year, so we're not going to touch on him. It's probably not fair. We did do the poll. 4 set above, 28 at, 68 below expectations. I would assume a lot of that has to do with the injury. I know Cade has been injured, but I still wanted to touch on it just because we did do a projection and we did get some games. So we projected Cade to be 22 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. His actual was just under 20 points, 6.2 rebounds, 6 assists. I was listening to Game Theory this morning, and they were talking about this draft class, and they actually said if you took out Cade's first 5 games this year, his numbers were essentially what we had projected here at 22, 6, and 7. I guess it's just a chance for us to talk about Cade and what this team is missing, because I do feel like sometimes it gets forgotten.
Yeah, so Cade had a bit of a weird year before he got hurt, just because he was in a pretty bad slump through preseason. And then, like you mentioned, those first 5 games. And we'll have to take credit and say, yeah, remove the first 5 games, like we were dead on. But he only played 12 games. So it's like remove half the season that he was there. And I don't think we can remove half the games he actually did.
That's fair.
Yeah, like, again, like Cade, it's just such a small sample size. It's tough to say one way or another. Because if you just go off of preseason and those first 5 games, it's like he regressed pretty badly. And then, well, 7 games after, it's like, oh, there he is. There's the Cade from last season who was leading the team to victory. So, split right down the middle. But I think just the way he is able to take over games, as he did a few times before he got hurt, just shows his upside and just shows that he's got that, like Dwayne always talks about, like X factor, right? Like a guy just kind of has that innate sense of when to take over, control of a game. And it would have been fun watching Cade this season kind of grow more into that role, which we'll have to wait until next season. But yeah, for him, I think the sample size we did see just kind of showed, like, yeah, he can be that guy, but he's also still got a lot of growing to do, which, again, we'll just have to wait until this fall to see what type of player he ends up being.
I miss Cade, man. Like I do. As a fan of Omari, and I know you don't get this side of it because this is your job and you're not a fan of the team. As a fan of the team, I miss Cade. And as a coach, sometimes, like, we're wired to next man up. Like, you don't make excuses, but I do get a little frustrated when I don't think people discuss and factor in this team missing Cade Cunningham enough because he's a second-year player. And I think a lot of people on the outside and even on the inside don't realize that he was truly the leader of this team. And the impact that has on Jaden Ivey. And I know people are going to say, well, Killian Hayes is playing well. Yeah, Killian Hayes is playing awesome. But Killian Hayes is only able to focus on Killian Hayes right now. He's not able to help Jaden Ivey. And I think Cade Cunningham's leadership and demeanor and just the way he approaches things would have helped Jaden Ivey this season. And we're about to talk about Jaden Ivey after the break. But I want to keep that at the forefront, or at least in the discussion when we talk about this team, when we judge Dwayne Casey, when we talk even about Jaden Ivey and some of these other players. Not having Cade around doesn't only affect Cade, it affects everybody around them. And I wanted to take a few seconds here to at least mention that. I don't know if you have anything to say about it, or we can go to break, but I wanted to make sure we continue to have that discussion and provide that nuance.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned this when I was watching the Lions last night, because when the Seahawks won, a lot of people, like, I just saw a lot of anger and frustration. Like, I can't believe the Lions didn't make the playoffs. And,
what?
It's like this team started off 1-6 and they're in the middle of rebuild, and, like, they're 8-8 now. So, like, if you go 8-8, 8-9, 9-8, don't make the playoffs in the second year before a rebuild, like, that's still fantastic, right? Like,
yeah.
In the discussion, that's a huge win. But getting back to Cade as well, what I've realized more and more as I do this job is that a lot of fans find losing intolerable. And it doesn't matter what the circumstance is. It doesn't matter how logical it is that they're losing. A lot of fans just think it's intolerable. And that's just one thing I've realized more and more is that I can't even engage with that part because they just cannot tolerate losing. It doesn't matter if you're, like, they could put me, you, and, like, 2 other B guys out there, because they're so hurt, and we could lose by 80.
Yeah,
and, like,
me, you, and James are getting buckets, man. We're winning. We ain't guarding. No, I will not speak for James. James may be able to maybe a lockdown defender, but me, you, and James are getting buckets.
Yeah, we might get a few, but but even if we were out there, fans would be in Pistons mentions like, y'all got to find better people. I can't believe this, yada, yada. And it's just, yeah, on paper, Cade being out is going to lower the trajectory of this season. But, for a lot of fans, it's like, I'm trying to watch them lose, so it doesn't matter why they're losing. I'm just trying to watch it. And that's all it really boils down to for them. But you're right. Like, you lose Cade, it's going to lower the ceiling for this team. Like, he should have been their best player. And even with Cade, it still would have been tough, right? So, without him, obviously, it's going to be even more tough. But I've just realized that you can't make logical arguments when you have a contingent of people who are watching this purely from an emotional standpoint. And that's just, I think, an area that's kind of hard to reconcile. But bottom line, yeah, you look at this roster and Cade being out, and I think a lot of their issues make sense.
No, there's absolutely things to be frustrated with, Omari, and things we wish were improved. But there are like legitimate, I hate to call them excuses. There's a better word for this than excuses. There's rational reasons for why this team doesn't win night in and night out. And it kind of came to the forefront listening to some of these national podcasts, listening to people talking. And it was funny. It all came to a head because Wes actually texted me. He's like, yeah, I was explaining to Jill, shout out his wife, Jill. Appreciate you giving us Wes to be with us when we record and everything we do. But he's like, I had to explain to Jill that Cade being out was more than just Cade not giving this team 26-6. It was the leadership and everything else he does as well. So I'll digress. We'll move on. We got to go to a short break. And then when we come back, we will get to the 2022 draft class. A few other players that we didn't make preseason predictions on, but we have to discuss just a little bit, maybe Coach Casey and the team overall. But we'll definitely start off with Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
All right, back with segment 3. And I believe this is the player who actually scored the highest on the poll as far as exceeding expectations, Jalen Duren. We projected 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 1 block, which was very much we don't expect him to play very much projection or play as much as he has projection. His actual is 7.6 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 0.7 blocks. So we did overproject the blocks. But everything else was kind of comically off, especially the rebounds. We said 3.5, and he's already been...
What were we thinking, Omari? What is wrong with us?
Like, he's already been one of the better rebounders in the NBA, like 40 games into his career, which, hey, you can't project that. You can't project that. He was 18 years old until the middle of November, and he had depth in front of him, Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Stewart.
And KO was on the roster when we did this. So that's the other
KO
thing.
was also on the roster.
This was pre the Boyan trade. So the roster, and we didn't know at that time that Nerlens Noel was literally only going to play when he had to play. Or when the team, I shouldn't say that. That made it sound like Nerlens doesn't want to play. Nerlens only plays when there's no other options. Like whatever the reason is, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I thought Nerlens was going to be an actual part of the rotation. So the big man rotation was a little bit jam-packed when we did these to justify us being so wrong.
Like Nerlens, I had a sense going into the year that Nerlens would be like a quote-unquote like emergency option. But a lot of that came down to one, like just overall depth. Like you saw Marvin and you saw Isaiah and you still have Kelly. So you're in a situation from a depth standpoint where it's like you don't necessarily have to play Jalen Duren unless he's just giving you stuff that you can't otherwise get. And two, just how ready will Jalen Duren be? And Wes also points out helpfully here that, Duren was also a poor rebounder in summer league, which like he's flashes athleticism, but still has some stuff clearly to work on. So the KO trade, KO being traded to Utah, cleared more of a path for Duren. And then he did his part just simply by playing really good basketball and being the best rebounder on this roster and just giving you some stuff that the team hasn't had consistently, whether it's just having that lob threat you need, like Marvin Bagley this time at the beginning of the year and also summer preseason. So that forged a path for Duren to get those minutes. And also Nerlens Noel, missing preseason and training camp as well, gave Duren an opportunity to kind of come in and show what he could do. So just basically everything that needed to happen for Jalen Duren to get into the rotation happened. And that's something that you can't predict. So I'm going to defend us a little bit just because of the KO trade and because you can't predict the injuries to Nerlens Noel and to Marvin Bagley that basically forced the coaching staff to turn to Jalen Duren pretty early. And he's done his part. Like, he's played really well. he's basically getting you a lot of what you would want from Nerlens, which is why I think they kind of saw him as more of an emergency option, because you can't play Duren and Nerlens Noel together, so you kind of have to pick one or the other on any given night. But no, he's been really fantastic for this team, and the 87% of people voting exceeding expectations, I think, speaks to just how good he's been as a rookie so far.
And just to back up what Wes said with the Summer League, I looked up his number. He only played 3 games and he only averaged 20.5 minutes per game. He averaged 3.3 rebounds per game, Omari, in the Summer League. 3.3. So that combined with when I scouted him, even before the Pistons drafted him, and I had some concerns about his defensive rebounding, I think is what led to the low, 3.5 rebounds per game prediction. I think what I way undervalued and did not see was him already being an elite offensive rebounder. I think there's still a lot of room to grow for him defensively overall, but even with his defensive rebounding, he's going to get a lot just because he's in the paint and he's massive and athletic. I think there's some box outs and some stuff like that he still has to grow with, but the offensive rebounding being elite, I missed that. That was not something I expected. And he's perfected already, the little tip backs that, sometimes he gets credit for, sometimes whoever he tips it to gets credit for. But there's legitimate, we can justify the rebounds, even though it looks comically bad right now based off Summer League, the film from college and some of those things. But credit to him. That's my point is he got better from Summer League to the regular season, Omari. His rebounding wasn't good in Summer League and he got better. And that's impressive for a young kid. And so that's all due respect and, shout out to Jalen Duren for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just stuff that you really can't predict at all. No, you can't predict the improvement he would have as an overall rebounder. Like you said, he got 4.5 or 3.5 per game in Summer League. And yeah, it's just tough to say that a guy will find his groove to that extent, especially when you're so young. So, yeah, I mean, we were very off on that one. But, yeah, I mean, just between fate and then also Jalen Duren being a very quick learner, that one aged pretty poorly. That's actually one of the most wrong predictions we've had on this one, if not the most wrong one. So shout out to Jalen Duren. Let's move on to the other rookie, Jaden Ivey. And we were also pretty low on. This is an interesting one.
We took a lot of heat for this. This is the one I remember. We took more heat for this than maybe anything we've done with the podcast. We always get some negative comments, whether on Freep or DBB but this was probably the one where there was the most you got essentially calling us haters for our Jaden Ivey predictions.
But I will say this, we were low on the points per game, but the actual sort of struggles he's had on the floor, we were correct about. And I don't think we necessarily got the numbers right, but the overall concerns we had, I think, have been proven true. And it just didn't necessarily translate to the stat box the way we imagined. But let's get to it. We projected 11.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 3.5 assists. He is averaging 14.9 points. So, pretty significant jump. But 4.1 rebounds, 4 assists. And the PO, 13% overachieving, 71% at expectations, and then 16% below expectations. So almost perfectly just from an expectation standpoint, an average season for Jaden Ivey. But I will point out right now he is shooting 40.9% overall and 32.5% from 3. So while he is scoring about 15 points a game, the efficiency really hasn't been there. And that's really propped up by the amount of shots that he's taking, which, again, we didn't expect Cade would miss the season. So he's probably taking a few more shots that he would be taking otherwise. So that kind of goes into the puzzle as well, right? Cade would have probably helped him develop more, and that hasn't been there. So he's had to take on more of a load, and that's had a knock-on effect on his efficiency. But overall, I would say that he's probably about the player we expected him to be at this point.
That's where I find the poll interesting, that there isn't more above expectations for him. And honestly, recently, I feel I don't think things have gotten negative, and it's not like the fan base has turned on him, but there's definitely more questions about Jaden Ivey from the fan base than makes sense to me, I guess, is what the right way to say it. I'm perfectly happy with what we've seen from Jaden Ivey, especially offensively. As you said, we knew he was going to have these struggles. The fact he's scoring 15 points a game obviously is above what I thought we were going to see. The passing has been as good, if not better. Obviously, there's some turnovers. We've seen all the good stuff. He's had some reps in the mid-range where it's like, okay, maybe he's starting to develop this. Honestly, the 3-point percentage being at 33% isn't bad for me. Like wouldn't have been shocked if it was under 30%, and he's getting to the line almost 5 times a game, which is higher than what I would have predicted. I guarantee it wouldn't have been that high, especially after the whistle we saw Cade get. Like Jaden's the best guard on the team getting to the free throw line in non-jump shooting situations. I know that's Alec Burks' thing, but he's definitely better getting the free throw line than Killian Hayes, and even than what Cade Cunningham did so far in the time we've seen from him. So I've been happy with Jaden Ivey on the offensive end, especially where he's being thrust into a role, as you mentioned, and we mentioned, and previously that maybe he wasn't ready for. My biggest thing with Jaden Ivey is he has been as bad, if not worse, defensively than what I even expected. And I'm starting to get a little concerned with that. I knew he was going to struggle defensively. I know he's a rookie, but it hasn't just been bad for an NBA player. I think his defense has been bad for an NBA rookie, Omari. Like, just Jalen Duren is very good for an NBA rookie big man, but probably not good for an NBA big man in general. Jaden Ivey, I think, has been bad just if you compare him to other NBA rookie guards and what you'd expect from them on the defensive end.
Yeah, I think the defense has not been there. And like most rookies, at any position you come in, you're not great defensively. But, I think for Jaden, you just want to see that possession effort get better. And I think offensively, he's getting downhill. He's getting to the line at a high rate, which was his best skill in college. And that's translated, which is good. For me, I think it's not great that he is only shooting about 41% overall, considering that just the skill and the physical talent he has as a downhill driver. That percentage at the rim should be a lot better. But, we see he gets a lot of blow-bys, or he just gets to the rim in transition, and probably like once or twice a game he gets to the rim and he misses a layup he probably should have got. And, we have games where he falls in love with the three a little more than he probably needs to. And I think from a shot selection standpoint, he's still very much figuring things out, as well as still figuring out, like NBA defenses can rotate quick and this may look like a clear lane, but it's not. Just a lot of that stuff, which is all rookie stuff, right? Like none of this stuff long-term is really anything that should worry you. But, I think when we said 11.5 points, it wasn't like we think he's going to suck projection. It was he's going to have some issues translating his game to the NBA projection, which, the points are higher, but the efficiency shows that he's still very much figuring a lot of stuff out, which is worse than what we were getting at with that projection. So overall, I think it's been an encouraging rookie season just because you see that athleticism and what it can do for him and for the team as a whole. And for him to just continuing to learn how to best apply that. And, and then just also just learning the speed of the NBA and what he can and can't get away with.
So he's played 39 games, Omari. Do you think he's missed at least one quote unquote wide open layup in half of those games? Do you think he's missed 20 wide open layups this season?
Yes, I would say probably a little bit more than half of those games.
Okay, so let's just work with half. If he's missed one wide open layup that you would expect a reasonable NBA player to make, that's 15 more made attempts. He would be 45% from the field if he's just made those. My point is, yes, it's concerning he's missed those because they are essentially wide open layups and he's in the NBA. To me, it's a touch thing. He's going so fast. He can't slow himself down or, find the right English off the backboard. But I would rather have to teach a guy how to do that than teach a guy how to get to the rim in general. And if you're telling me all he has to do is make wide open layups and now he's a 45 to 50% guy from the field with the 3-point shot that maybe upticks a little bit, I'm okay with that. To me, then it's like, okay, find the mid-range stuff, get better defensively, especially with the effort. And now he's the player we all thought he was going to be. So I guess that's where I'm not overly concerned. I'm not saying he's going to be 100% what we thought. I'm just saying we've seen all the things to still have those beliefs that he can be the player we thought he was going to be coming into the league.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We're still dealing with less than half of the season of data. So yeah, so anything he's not doing well is probably going to be it's going to stand out more just because you don't have that much of a sample size to compare it against. But you're right. Like, I think he's probably been a tad better offensively than the numbers suggest because he is missing a lot of gimme layups right now. And another thing for him, too, is, like, yes, he turns the ball over, but we do come again that he's probably more of an off guard long term than your lead initiator, which, again, like, I don't want to knock him for that because he's been asked to do more point guardy things with Cade being out, and coming into the year, that's not something that we expected. So I think this time next year, Ivy makes more of those gimmies, and with Cade back, you have to act, and Killian also playing the way he's been playing, you could ask Ivy to do less overall, right? Like, he has fewer decisions to make, and he could just focus more on what he's great at, which is punishing the rim, pressuring the rim, bending the defense, finding open shooters and whatnot, which, like we saw with Cade at the beginning of the year, he was actually really good at, and his numbers were overall better next to Cade. So Cade's injury, I think, changed the trajectory of his season, and it's kind of made some of the things he needs to improve stand out. But you're right, overall, like, I think it's, I think the poll reflected that this has been an overall pretty solid rookie year for him, and I haven't seen anything that would make you kind of panic long term either, right? Like, I think every year, I think we see a rookie guard, like, after All-Star weekend, really find their groove and they kind of take off. And I still think that Ivy could be that player this season.
Yeah, Jalen Green did it last year, right? Like, he was incredible post All-Star break. And so that I think you're right. I think he exploded onto the scene. He had Cade playing next to him. He's hit a little bit of a slump, maybe a little bit of that mid-season rookie wall. Other rookies has as well. Like, Benedict Mathurin was shooting almost like 50% from three, and I looked this morning and it's down to like 34 or 33 or something. Shaden Sharp's, up and down. Even Keegan Murray, who is the most consistent player in the draft, has nights where he doesn't shoot it well, only scores 4 points. And all of those guys are in roles that are better suited for them. Like, again, I feel like I've started to get a little bit defensive of some of this stuff, especially with Jaden Ivey. All of these other rookies are in roles that Benedict Mathurin comes off the bench. Keegan Murray's like the fourth or fifth option in that starting lineup. None of them are being the primary creator and on-ball guy like what Jaden Ivey is being asked to do now at times. I know Killian does it at times. So I'm not at all disappointed in these rookies. Maybe it seemed like it always comes down to expectations. Just a few more here, Omari. I'm just going to read these off. You give me your biggest takeaway. Casey and the team, 56% said below expectations. Boyan, 82% above. Burke, 68 above. Knox, 51% above. Kojo was pretty much middle of the pack. Rodney, middle of the pack. Nerlens Noel, 75% below. Anything that stood out from those, just the Twitter poll, because we didn't do preseason predictions for those. Anything that stood out from those numbers before we go?
Yeah, I think slightly more people thinking that the team and Dwayne Casey have been below expectations is interesting, because I would still say that this team has probably been within expectations. I had them finishing 14th in the East, like even with Cade. That was before the Boyan trade, but even if we had done that with Boyan on the roster, I wouldn't have guessed higher than like 12th, just because the team's young, the East is the East. I just didn't see a realistic pathway. So this kind of goes to what I was saying earlier, where a lot of fans just can't tolerate losing. But I think fans tend to set timelines based on their own patience, not necessarily what is like realistically going to happen. It's not this team has what it takes to win. It's I'm ready to watch a winning team. And, if you want ready to watch a winning team and they're not there yet for rational reasons, you're going to be disappointed. So I'm not surprised by it, but still interesting to me that more fans are low on this team than probably where you expect it, just considering you can look at the roster, and I think the record kind of speaks for itself, honestly. Like, I don't think there's any surprises there. And then, like, we haven't talked about Kevin a lot, like we have, but like he's been fantastic, obviously, compared to expectations. Like, we didn't know if he would be a rotation guy, and for him to come in and just shoot the ball well, it's a pretty big leap for him. Teams always need just somewhat bouncy 6'8" forwards who can knock down shots, and that's what he's been. So Kevin's been good. And then Burks, 68% above expectations is too low.
It should be 100.
Come on, he should be fantastic. Like, that's way too low, y'all. Come on, like Boyan is at 82%.
Boyan should be at 100 too, because I didn't think he was going to come and score 20 a game.
Yeah, but it's just Bogey's higher than Burks. That's interesting to me, because to me, I've been more surprised by Burks than Bogey. Yeah, that's interesting to me. But beyond that, the rest of these are, I think, pretty understandable. Only other one is people, being surprised that Nerlens hasn't played well, which, again, I don't think you could really play him and Duren and Bagley when all three are healthy. So
he had some big fans. Like, I have people tweet at me quite a bit, like, why isn't Nerlens playing? Nerlens would help this team so much. Nerlens a really good defender. And My Nerlens film breakdown, whenever they acquired him, I wasn't super high on him getting a ton of minutes. But
yeah, I think that's the college push. I think a lot of people remember him being the number one recruit that went to Kentucky after Anthony Davis and the expectations that came with that. And I think a lot of that's kind of mixed into the expectations that came in here. Even though you can look at his NBA career and see that, he's probably been about what you would expect based on his past stops. So I know this is really not surprising. But again, I don't think these people have watched Nerlens. I think they just remember Kentucky number one recruit Nerlens, and expectations were set because of that.
He did play some good minutes on Sunday night. Hit a couple mid-range jumpers, increasing that trade stock. Maybe Troy Weaver can fleece a second rounder out of somebody. But that's it for this week. We'll be back next Tuesday, normal time. We're back on our normal schedule here. So, Omari, appreciate you. Great season from the Detroit Lions. Shout them out again. Take it away, my guy.
Yeah, great season for the Lions, and now we can take all the Lions fans back, and they can watch the Pistons and tune into the Pistons post. Win-win for everybody. But thank you, everybody, for listening. Going to do the outro. Shout out to Kerry Jr. II and Robin Chan, our executive, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, big shout out to Wes Davenport. We'll talk to you all next week.